Okay. Well, this talk is going to be on product market fit. So something that every startup is, striving to achieve, something that I've strived to achieve. I can't say I've ever actually achieved it, but I've become fascinated with that topic. So again, my name is Ted. Very happy to be here. I am a Bitcoiner, but I definitely have one foot in the fiat world and hopefully going to bring some of those insights to you today. So what is product market fit? It's building products people love and specifically will buy. So there's a lot of people building cool stuff that they won't necessarily buy. And I really like the Y Combinator phrase. It's short and simple. I'm going to blow this out into a ridiculous amount of detail and apply some very rigorous frameworks to expand upon this statement. But at a high level, making something that people want. And what we're going to talk about is, or I'm going to try to help in this workshop, is how to most effectively achieve that goal. A way to not achieve this goal is, like Keon, I've worked on many, failed. I think he's beat me. 7 is a lot of, that's a high, tall act to follow, but built a lot of cool shit that nobody wants. Like, I don't know if it is cool or not if no one ever uses it. But this in particular, we did absolutely zero customer research, no feedback, nothing like that. And we built something that we thought was awesome, and we lost $1 million in the process. So I did get to fly it, and
Wait, you actually built that?
yeah, I did the avionics. So it was a team of about like 3 or 4 people. I found out after the fact I was the only engineer on this project, right? That was pretty crazy. Shouldn't have existed, right? Doesn't exist. It got disassembled, sold for parts. I think they recouped around like 150,000 from the parts. So product failure, right? Another thing that is a trap that I've fallen into is kind of the flip side, which is using customer research to justify building cool shit that shouldn't exist, right? And that's a little pernicious problem. So this in particular, this study, I did 107 ethnographic interviews. Average duration was 45 minutes. 2 people were on the interview team. It's about 4 to 1 in terms of time with logistics, getting interviews set up to actually conducting the interview. So we're talking like 300 hours of customer research over a 2-month time period. So like extremely intensive effort, pages and pages of notes. And on the very last day, I was summarizing the notes, cutting up these little these like icons of personas to try to make sense to the CEO and the board, because we had raised some funding at that point, that we should go in direction A as opposed to B. And well, they didn't believe it because this is like art class, right? This is not something that someone who's putting up millions of dollars in investment is really going to buy off on. So that kind of opened my eyes to the degree of rigor that is required. In this particular case, this product, there was a couple iterations of the product, but it won multiple awards. We raised, last I counted, was $25 million. There's over 100 people employed by this business. It's still very much in existence, but this company should not exist, right? This is a zombie. Like, it is just consuming venture capital dollars and, like destroying it, right? So this is something, there's very cool tech here. This was doing brain signal monitoring. You could control drones by looking around, all kinds of cool tech in this thing, but shouldn't exist. We did find something that could exist in the customer research effort, but we had so much momentum in one direction that the team didn't buy off on the customer research as a valid direction to go in. So that got me very interested. I have a background in physics, so I was like, well, I need to get to the root problem of this. I don't want to play a game of chance and gambling. I want to get to the root cause of innovation success and figure out, can this help in a future effort so that I can actually achieve a good outcome. So every single business today, I do a lot of my work in traditional fiat consulting, mostly big companies, but small companies too. I work for a consulting firm that does market research, and every company does customer research, every single one that exists. And I've been able to see behind the scenes of how these things happen. Very rigorous, very bureaucratic and slow in a lot of cases, but they're doing many customer research efforts, they're doing surveys, they're fielding focus groups, they're throwing kind of everything they can to spin up new products, because the cost of failure is very high, and the cost of winning is even higher, right? So, companies are trying to succeed, and the way they do that is through customer research efforts. I'd argue Bitcoin is just another example of this, right? Because Bitcoin is not just a cool technology. Think about every shitcoin, right? That is throwing together a blockchain and some other cool, some cryptography in there. Mix it with a little scam artist, Ponzi, good website. Boom, you got a shitcoin. The way Bitcoin works is understanding the nature of money. Why do people use money? Like, what is the purpose that they're trying to achieve, and what were the flaws in prior forms of money? So Bitcoin is really an extension of deeply understanding users, right? This is the ethos that I embody these days, not the ethos that I used to embody. It used to be jump in, fail fast, iterate. And while I would say that pretty much every startup that I know of still starts with an idea, you do want to recognize that you want to be solving the right problem, and you want to understand the nature of the problem, because that is what holds the key to actually figuring out the right way to solve it. So I had some failures, right? So I had two startups that one failed, the other one was a zombie. That zombie one, man, that one's still out there gobbling up. Maybe it's good, right? It's gobbling up venture capital. Like, maybe that's doing a good thing, but it's not what we're about, right? We're about to make real companies that actually help people. That's the whole point of what we're doing. So I became fascinated with this approach. It's actually what led me to Bitcoin, because I was so fascinated by new technologies, and I became very used to going up to founders and saying, what are you working on, and who is it helping? And then just really listening very closely and seeing if I could understand it. And 9 times out of 10, I couldn't understand it. I've never once really understood any shitcoin. I think I almost could understand Monero, but not quite. I never could fully understand Monero, so I had to back out of that one. But I was trying to understand, like, what is a framework that you can use to deeply understand what drives people to buy one product over another. And I was actually reading Ludwig von Mises' Human Action. And in it, he has a statement. And that statement, the statement originates from Aristotle. Aristotle's kind of old version of the statement is, people have ideals to instantiate upon the world. So he's kind of talking about like moral values that he wants to see realized in the world, virtues. Ludwig von Mises said, people act and employ means to achieve chosen ends. And it seems like just another statement, another quote that you can use, but this is actually a very radical, different philosophy when it comes to product development and startups, because a lot of startups today are building things that are trying to optimize for behavior, kind of unconscious behavior, like, is this button something that you're going to click, or can I flash something quickly to get you to interact, right? As opposed to understanding that all human beings, or at least human beings that are worth creating solutions for, have intention. Like, someone who is acting purely reflexively, is that even a human, right? What is that, right? That's an animal, right? An animal is someone who, or an animal is not using conscious thought. Now, they probably are, right? But the point is that by viewing humans through the lens of conscious actors, a solution to getting product market fit can be found. Carl Menger expanded on this in his book, Principles of Economics. I'll put that down there, which is that the needs that customers have can be prioritized by importance and satisfaction. So people are trying to achieve their very important needs and lower their degree of unsatisfaction they have with achieving those needs. So I'm going to take that thought, put it into the Y Combinator statement here, and change this a little bit. So make something people want. It kind of almost implies you're making something and then you're trying to make people want that thing, right? Like, they're not saying that, but I think you could construe it that way. The way I would say it is, people want to achieve some end. That's the Austrian Economics view on human action, is people act to achieve ends. And so they employ means to get there. So you should make better means to help them get to their chosen ends. And you can kind of see it's a little bit different, right? Because all of a sudden, now the unit of analysis is these chosen ends. And if I can understand that in great detail, then in theory, at least I could develop the ideal means to help them get there, which they'll buy and will lead to product market fit. The company I worked for is the one that introduced me to this concept. It's the same exact concept, but it's got a new terminology, which is called jobs to be done. But it's the same exact concept, which is that people are trying to achieve some end. So you've got some customer or user, they're in a starting situation, they're trying to get to their end situation. You arrive at the airport, you're trying to get to your destination, right? You are a parent, you're trying to pass on life lessons to children. Right? These are end goals. Maybe you're a saver and you're going to hire a means to achieve your end of storing value. Maybe your means is not going to work very well and you might, a new invention will come out, right? A 60-40 portfolio, and maybe that gets the job done a little better. And then of course, Bitcoin is now trying to solve those properties. This is important because a lot of times people like to say that the future is all probabilities, right? And while there's obviously you can't know the future, it's a little bit of a cop-out of critical thought, because I can tell you that if I can get a higher degree of energy density that can be harnessed, better than anything else exists, people will use that. Now I still got to market it, I got to build a company, there's all sorts of nuance, but if it's a fundamentally superior product, it will get used with the right wrapping, the business wrapping around it. That's why we can say with high degree of confidence that Bitcoin will be adopted. It's already a foregone conclusion because it's already superior on the metrics that matter to savers who are trying to store value. So the same thing is true in every possible reason you could hire any product or anything, right? Everything can be distilled to this idea of human action. Everything except for reflexive behavior. So if you whack on your knee and your leg kicks out, we're not talking about that. We're talking about any sort of action, conscious action that you're doing. So if you're going to the library to get information, you might be using Google, and now you're using ChatGPT, right? And ChatGPT might be addressing some needs better, like it's helping you get information a lot faster than before, but it's maybe the accuracy of the information is lower. So in some ways it's better, and in some ways it's worse. But over time, you could imagine a solution coming to being that gets the job done radically better. Okay, so that's my prelude about customer research. That's important. So what I want to do now is make it a little bit more of a workshop that you all can work through. And for even people who don't have a company, I've got a workshop for you too. So the first thing I'll say is, this is all well and good, but this is only the tip of the iceberg, because what this theory allows you to do is build out a framework. Because a job to be done or an end to achieve is a process. It's a process in problem space, and we can optimize processes. That's a profound insight, and this is the way we do it. I advocate this approach. I'm sure there'll be better approaches in the future, but this is the most rigorous customer understanding process I'm aware of that exists today. And the way you do it is you break down that end goal into a series of steps, not the things they are doing today, the things they are trying to do. So for example, let's go back to the Uber example. So what I might be doing with a taxi cab is I might be walking out into the street, scanning for a taxi, raising my hand, checking my pockets, see if I have cash, right? Whereas when I'm hiring a Lyft, I'm doing a very different process. But I'm doing the same thing. I'm determining where I want to go. I'm locating a means to get there. I'm, getting the route. I'm monitoring my journey as I get there. I'm adjusting if I need to make changes, and then I'm arriving at my destination. So what I just stated are steps in problem space. So no solutions. So we separated the realm of products from the realm of what people are trying to achieve. Each one of those steps has a series of metrics underneath it with which people use to judge the attainment of that step. So if I'm trying to locate a means of transport, like I booked an Uber the other day and it dropped out, you know, when you wait for a while and then sometimes it just says, oh, sorry, we couldn't find it. Like that's really aggravating and it can disrupt your plans if you're trying to be too tight. You know, that's a need. That's a need in maybe the locate step or confirm that my ride is arriving when I thought it was. So there's a series of metrics within each steps, but there's many metrics customers have, but not all will have an equal importance and satisfaction. And different populations will vary. So I know I'm adding a lot of nuance here, and we're going to back this up and make it simple in just a second, but I wanted to show you kind of the full picture of where this can go if you do want to push it to its extreme. So Carl Menger said, people act first to reduce the unsatisfaction on their most important needs. So you can quantify each of these needs for importance and satisfaction. Satisfaction being their ability today to use the means at their disposal, and maybe it's nothing, right? Like maybe they're duct taping stuff, they're building it from scratch, they don't buy a product, but they're still using some form of means to get to that end result, and they might be very unsatisfied. Like, I really want to go to Mars, I don't have the means to go to Mars, right? That's not gonna happen. I'm unsatisfied. I don't know how important it is. I like to think it's important, but you know, maybe it's not the most important, but you know, like that's unsatisfied. But if something comes along that reduces the price down here in Texas, then all of a sudden, you know, maybe that's feasible. So one other thing I'll say about this is a cool thing about this framework is that it's static in time, which is a really wild way to think about things. So imagine growing a crop. People were trying to grow a crop 10,000 years ago, they're trying to grow a crop today, and they'll be trying to grow a crop 10,000 years in the future. Or maybe there'll be a higher level of make food, but there still is that grow a crop job. That'll always exist, right? Getting to a destination, that'll always exist. Maybe we are transporting. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was kind of wondering, like, well, maybe I should have let you finish the thought.
No.
But it's kind of like, okay, going to Mars, that's not necessarily like a static thing because the importance changes over time. It's not important today because there's nothing on Mars, but 1,000 years from now, it might be important because we built a like colony or something like that, and all of a sudden the relative importance has increased over time.
Yeah, exactly right. And Logan's gesturing, so next one you can do at the mic. But yeah, I'll repeat it. So like it's a really good point, which is, well, don't these change over time, especially importance in particular? Like for example, coronavirus, right? Maybe working remotely wasn't as important before, but now it's more important because we physically can't be co-located. And so yes, the answer is yes, importance does change. What I've found is that typically it changes over much slower time periods than you might expect. Like usually we're talking decades, plural, for importance to change, whereas satisfaction can change much quicker in like years and maybe 1 decade, like 2 to 10 years. And this is just after running many surveys and seeing how things change. Different industries will change faster. So I imagine in Bitcoin, satisfaction is probably evolving a lot faster because there's just more solutions that are being created. But importance maybe isn't changing. If the government came in and created a big crackdown on storing value, for example, then that would probably decrease a lot of people's satisfaction and maybe it would increase the importance for other things, right? So that can change. And I did a study for a cryptocurrency exchange, and it was investors who were considering purchasing cryptocurrency for the first time. And it was interesting. The more thought and energy they spent considering cryptocurrency, the higher their importance went and the lower their satisfaction went. And I've certainly experienced this, which is like once you go down that's why it's a rabbit hole, right? Because when you go down, you can't go back, right? You see things that you can't unsee, and you're like, oh God, it's really this bad. And you look into it, it's like it's even worse than you thought, and it's just worse and worse. And then you now I need a hardware wallet. Now I need to secure the hardware wallet. Now I need to like think about attack vectors and all this stuff, right? So yes, the answer is yes, it can change, but it's not fast. Like for the purpose of a startup, you can think of it kind of constant in the next few years. But over longer spans of time, yeah, it's definitely something you have to repeat on some cadence. Okay, so I want to get to a workshop with you all. Hopefully it's helpful. The way to think about products through this framework is that a product is, you can think of each one of these needs as a one-to-one with a feature. Now, it's not quite like that because sometimes 3 needs could do 1 feature, or 3 features could do 1 need. But for the purposes of this, we can think of it that way. Your first product is just addressing a couple needs, and people may not be willing to pay for that. In fact, it's not popular today, but I'd argue that it's a completely valid decision to pay your users to use your product because they're incurring a cost to use a suboptimal solution. So you can get them to use it by paying them. And you see this with venture capital, where they'll brute force kind of a freemium service, or they'll somehow incentivize the user. And it's a kind of a blitz scaling approach. But it's something to be aware of, because when you start, it might be like you're getting 1 feature, the next feature, and people aren't using it. Maybe in the V2, you might see a little bit of growth, but nothing exponential. And all of a sudden on V3, you've now gone to critical mass where the entire market might shift over to your product. And that's when people say that it's like the market is ripping the product out of their hands. Like the product, your thing has to exist, and you're the best conduit to make it exist. So all of a sudden you get lots of funding, you get lots of team, and from the outside perspective, we would say that's a very successful high growth company. The founders pulling their hair out because they're trying to scale something way faster than it was operating in the past. It's a bit like boiling water. And you can think of this from any of your favorite brands. So would you switch from your favorite toothpaste or airline if you select or car, right? Some people really like certain cars. Would you switch from your favorite brand for another brand that was only 1% better? Probably not, right? It would be 10, 15, 20%. We've found that the magic number is actually 15% if you measure it in this way, 10 to 15%. But the point is that there's a switching cost, so it's kind of like boiling water with your customers. Once you hit that threshold, that's product market fit, and all of a sudden now you're in scaling mode. Completely changes the nature of the game. So typical startup activities, and this is ideal order. Now, I would argue that everyone goes through this order, even if they spend less than a millisecond on a particular step. But ideally, you survey the landscape of potential markets to go into. And when I use the word market, I'm defining a market as a specific person who's trying to achieve a specific end. So maybe you are a small business owner who is trying to manage your operation cash flow, right? That could be one market. A different market might be a consumer who is trying to make a purchase. Very different market, and you can do an apples to apples comparison of those two things if you treat them in that lens, because they're both a group of people and a job they're trying to get done. Then within that job, you break it down like I showed before, get all the needs. Ideally, you could quantify and prioritize them. This is what the big companies are doing. So when they're spinning up a new division and spending stupid amounts of money on this kind of effort, they are understanding all of the needs within that job, and then they're going to design a solution that fits those needs so that they can be sure that they're going to get to product market fit. They're kind of like de-risking the entire process. As startup founders, we don't usually have that luxury, but we know that that's the end goal that we're aiming towards. Most founders, and myself included, I've done this many, many times, is you kind of go pretty quick through the first two steps. You're like, this would be a cool area to get into. Like, what's a good example? So I did an education company, and Oliver, we can talk about education at some point too. My education company was low tech. We did a children's book, and so I was like, I want to help girls with STEM, right? So science, technology, engineering, and math. And I sort of just picked that. My sister was not in STEM, and it sort of resonated with me. And I thought, well, one of the reasons that girls may not be going into STEM is because they're not getting the creative problem-solving type toys at an early age. So I kind of identified that need. It's something that's written about. I didn't really do a lot of research. There's very cursory, like 2-3 articles, right? So I've just gone through selecting a market, finding the needs very quickly. Now I'm building my idea, which was a children's book to start. The idea was like, this is like, what is the easiest thing we could possibly make? Let's make a kid's book. I mean, we can just print off pieces of paper. We made it in PowerPoint, like it was really low tech. And turns out that's really hard to do, is to make a good children's book. So 2 years later, I burned every last dollar I owned, and our team went from started with 2 founders, we went up to 3 founders, we went to 10 unpaid employees, and then down to us 3 founders again. And I was sleeping in a car at that point, and I was out of money. I could either fill my tank of gas or buy my next set of groceries, but I couldn't do both. So I was like, okay, I need to pull the plug on this. So I pulled the plug on that one. But the point is that I was in this loop. So I was iterating as fast as we possibly could. I'd say we were doing roughly, probably similar to Keon, 6-week-ish iterations. And it was always back to the drawing board. And it was always iteration around the manifestation of the product, but not iterating on the core assumptions that we used to build that product. And we were able to identify issues with the core, but we had way too much momentum going in one direction, and it was kind of too late at that point. So I would say almost every startup I've ever talked to, even big companies start somewhere, right? They're not just spinning up a new division out of nowhere. They're already in something adjacent. So the question is, let's say you recognize that, okay, I've got an idea. Maybe I didn't go through a super rigorous market selection or need gathering exercise, but I'm somewhere. How do I incorporate customer research to ensure the next thing I do, starting from where I am today, is as optimal as possible? Highest likelihood of getting me towards product market fit. So I helped build this tool in conjunction with 2 amazing people, Tony Ulwick, who's the CEO of my company, and Steve Blank, who created the lean startup methodology. So really lucky to work with both of them. And for those of you who have computers, you can go to my GitHub down here to download this file. This is the workshop part of the process. And for those who don't have computers, I printed out a couple of them in that black folder. So I think I have 2 colors. So if it's just you 2, then you can each get just the one off the top. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh, it is Ted Thizzy, THIZZY is my GitHub, and it's /startup resources. But if you go to my GitHub, it's right on the first page. In fact, I'll pull this up right here. Yeah. This was the $25 million company. Well before it was $25 million, this was I think we were at 200K at this point, and we're testing out different EEG stuff. Cool tech. I was having fun. I think I was sleep deprived. I just kept it as a picture. It's but you're monitoring brain signals, and just fun fact about this: that company could have succeeded because I found through all this research, I found a niche of the market that's way different than what we had sold to investors. Unfortunately, I had this bright idea of putting $1 trillion on a slide deck, like font 200, $1T, right? And I said, we actually pitched this to investors, and they really like that. They like those big numbers. So, if you ever having trouble raising money, just jack the numbers up. Add some zeros, that'll help. So we played that game, and we won that game. The problem is, once you have those investors on board, if you sold them Vision A, which in this case was a general sleep tech that one third of the world would use, so 3 billion people would pay $300 for this device, and then you say, no, that's not right. What we're going to pivot. What we're going into is a $50 million total addressable market, but we can get 80% of that. I'm very, very high confidence that we would get 80% because I sat down with these people. They were parents of children who were recently diagnosed with epilepsy. And specifically when the epilepsy medication only worked about a third, sometimes 2/3 of the time. So in that situation, when the medication's not working, there's a 2 to 3 year period where they say, oh yeah, keep trying, keep varying it. Imagine being a parent. The most dangerous period of time is when your child is sleeping, because they could have a seizure and flip onto their front and suffocate. Imagine trying to like have a normal life as a parent. So interview after interview after interview, we eventually stumbled upon the epilepsy market, and then we started zoning in. It's not people with epilepsy. It's not adults with epilepsy. It's not kids with epilepsy. It's not adults who have kids with epilepsy. It's adults who have untreated kids with epilepsy. And then boom, that group, they would be willing to pay, thousands plus for our device. I had one interviewee who said, who wanted to buy the prototype, which was just a demo, out of my hands, because like it was such a severe problem. They're like, I will make whatever the heck you have in your hand work because my kid needs this, or I need this, because they can't hold down a full-time job. Like it's just a constant concern. So what we were able to do is reduce the form factor of an EEG. No kid wants to wear this, but we could get it to the form factor of a hearing aid. So it's hidden, it's discreet. Hearing aids, it's kind of like you make it pink or whatever. It's like, it's a cool thing. Gives you an alert, a text. So kind of painful for me because you find this out and you say, I sat with these people, like this is what they want. And here's hundreds of pages of notes to prove it. And they're like, no, like that's not where we're going. And so that was the big inflection point for me to say, I need to take this market research rigor to the next level and say, first of all, if I'm going to do it right from the get-go. Don't bring on that investment too early. And second of all, it's important to be rigorous with customer discovery. Not ethnographic interviews are great, and maybe they will convince you personally, but when you're trying to convince other people, hard data, numbers, kind of a rigorous, well-defined methodology, that can go a long ways, and it will give you more precise information as to what are the independent variables that you're changing with your product. So that was a total side note. But if you go here, you go startup resources, and then I've got two tools. So people who do have an idea or startup and you want to reverse engineer that startup into this framework I was talking about, you can click on the Jobs to be Done Market Definition Canvas. That's the second one right there. And for people who are thinking about maybe multiple potential ideas and you want to compare your ideas against each other, you can click on that second one, which is the Market Selection Tool Excel. I'm going to talk through the Market Definition Canvas first. And yeah, there's a black and white one there, Ben. You can take that one. But yeah, so I'll talk through this one, and then that'll be most of the workshop. I'll have some other stuff at the end just to wrap it up, get a value proposition out, but then I will hang out for a while afterwards. So if anyone wants to go into this in greater detail, I'd be happy to. I love doing this. I think it's really important to do. So let's back up here. So at a high level, what we're trying to do is reverse engineer a product, an existing product, idea, startup, or even other market definition, however you think about it today, and we want to end up with that job to be done, which we can then use to break out into those needs. So we can then say, okay, our product's here, the needs are there, where do we pivot? So the way this canvas works, has everyone gotten the canvas? Okay. So you start on the left. You say, what is the idea? Put that in box 1. In box 2, you're going to say, who is the job executor? And that is the user or the customer, right? That is the person who is using the product to get a job done. So for example, if I am a homeowner and I hire someone to mow my lawn, well, there's 2 different job executors you can focus on. There's the person who is mowing the lawn, right? And there's other person, the homeowner, who is trying to maintain their yard to a certain height, right? They're kind of 2 different jobs. And generally in most cases, I say think about the homeowner first and brainstorm many different ideas. So you can write down 3, 5, even 10 if you're feeling very creative, just different ways you might describe that person. And then what we're going to do in the next box right below is we're going to roll up those people into higher level categories, right? Maybe 2, 3, 4 categories that group those people together, right? So for example, let's say we are focusing on saws. Maybe you've made a cool tool that can cut stuff. You might say, well, my job executors, maybe it's carpenters or electricians or like it's like a woodworker, same as carpenter, metal cutter. You have those big things you can cut tubes with. You could list off all those, and then you might end up rolling up and say, well, is it tradesmen? Is it contractors? You could brainstorm some higher terms to do that. So I'll give this about 5 minutes, and then I'm just going to walk around. I know you're not going to get this, Logan. Anyone who's doing this remotely, please feel free to put your questions in if you can, and I'll keep an eye on that and answer it virtually. But I'll walk around. Let's do this in 5 minutes, and then try to get through box 3, and then we'll make a selection, move to the next half of the canvas. Make sense? Cool. Yeah, so as you're doing this, I know it's easy to get caught up in the verbiage and like how you refer to it. This is really a brainstorming activity where, in box 2, you're really putting together whatever it could be. And then 3, you're coming up with a couple different categories. So don't worry too much about verbiage. Then when we get into 4, that's when we're going to try to put a stake in the ground. Exactly. Who's our customer?
So like when you gave the example of the parents of undiagnosed epileptic children, that's your number 4?
Yeah. So in that case, that story was, I used a different framework that was kind of more brute force feedback. That was 107 interviews. that I'd probably describe that more as a segment within a market. The overarching market would be parents of epileptic children, and then the subset segment probably would be who have not been diagnosed, right? And so it'd be parents of undiagnosed children. Then I'll get to the job to be done in a second. But if you think about the SAW example, you might have contractors, tradesmen, et cetera. What we want to do in the fourth box is basically say, which of those categories encapsulates the most of all of the people that I put in boxes 2 and 3? And so you might say tradesmen in the case of the SAW. That's what we ended up going with in that particular project because tradesmen was a broad term. Now, a lot of times when you're thinking about the way market research is done using other frameworks, you hypothesize a segment up front, and then you kind of iterate on that segment. But the problem is when you do it that way, you are varying. You basically have one equation, which is the product, and one equation with 2 variables. Like one variable is the product, and one variable is the market or the person and their needs. And you're varying both in a single equation, which you can't solve through a process like this. You can only solve it through brute force. So you can tell I really like the theory of this. So from a theoretical perspective, that's the reason why a lot of methodologies will default back on kind of brute force ideation. But if you can fix the market, then all of a sudden that becomes an equation you can solve. And the process of getting to product market fit becomes predictable. Now, that's not to say it's easy. Like it's still very, very difficult, right? But at least it's solvable, right? And it's not being left to chance. So that's the idea. What market are you working on?
Investment advisory. So basically that bridge of traditional finance into incorporating Bitcoin into that regulated business. So it's kind of getting away from that 60/40 portfolio and really truly having an analysis of risk, not only with the holdings of Bitcoin that would be, that could be proposed, but then also being able to analyze, well, what have you done in the traditional market? And when you think that you're low risk tolerance, but you've been doing all this crap that's like way out of where you think you are.
Yeah.
And trying to balance that.
Right. So there could be a couple different directions you go there. And this is the simplified workshop version.
Yeah.
But what I would advocate is for anyone who's doing a startup, like I said before, 55 minutes on the problem, 5 minutes on the solution. Like I really, really believe that wholeheartedly in my bones of my soul because I've slept in a car and fought off raccoons when I was sleeping in a tent. It's not fun. Those things, they collaborate and they have language. I'm not going to go there. The point is that it's worth to do like a big exercise with this. And I think in your case, you might want to run maybe 2 or 3 of these sheets, canvases next to each other. One could be like investment managers. Another could be actuaries, risk analysts, right? So one's maybe more of a managerial role and one is more boots on the ground actually doing risk analysis. Maybe there's some other people in there. And each one is going to have a slightly different job to be done. And in a lot of cases, what you might think is a dual-sided market could be distilled back to a single market. It's just one person is like the main mover and shaker, and it's not always the CEO or the chief financial officer, right? A lot of times it could be someone lower or someone in the middle of the organization. So, but investment manager could be one, or actuary or something along those lines. Anyone else totally stuck on trying to roll it up into a single person? It's okay if it's just kind of
Is that 3 to roll?
4. So basically just pick one from 3, put it into 4.
Okay, so you create multiple abstractions and then kind of bring that into a single.
Yeah, exactly. Just like pick your abstraction, or if no abstraction is really fully encompassing, try to create an even higher level of abstraction that encapsulates all of them. So in a case of people who are surfing the internet, you might say, well, really all consumers are trying to surf the internet, right? Because it's, okay. That's a fast pivot right there. Cool. Okay, so next side of the canvas. So this is getting to the other half of a market. So remember, we're defining our market as a group of people and the job they're trying to get done. So moving on to box 5, or 5 through 7. I'll go a little slowly through this one because it's important. So the first thing is describe the function of your product or your idea as you envision it today. And let's say you maybe have a couple different features, feel free to list them. And just, you don't have to do a full description, but so that you understand what is the function that you are offering that group of people today, in your own words, right? And then in box 6, this is where it gets very interesting. You're going to describe other products and solutions people use in conjunction with that function. So let's say you are trying to innovate the toothpaste. Well, obviously people are using a toothbrush and a mirror and water, and they're using other products immediately in conjunction, which you can then roll up into an abstracted statement like maintain dental hygiene. So you see what I did there? And that's not to say that your startup is going to go after that higher level job, because now you're competing with Colgate. Maybe that is, V3 of your company. Like Elon Musk may have set the goal of starting to get to Mars, but maybe he started with getting a CubeSat to the Kármán line, like not even into orbit, right? And so you kind of build up to those bigger jobs. But to start, think about your core functionality and then what's immediately adjacent to your core functionality. And that'll get you through boxes 5 and 6. Then in box 7, you're just trying to roll that up and start brainstorming some of these job statements. Quick note on box 7, and forgive me if I'm giving you too much information. The syntax for box 7, try to write it this way. Try to write it as a verb and an object. So I'm trying to get to a destination. And you can also add an optional contextual clarifier, which is in context in which the job is happening. So I'm trying to surf the web anonymously, right? Or I am trying to, like a good example of this is, am I trying to repair a wound, or am I trying to repair a wound in the battlefield? Like totally different context, right? Different needs are going to, all of a sudden, what is it, hot glue that they use? That sounds a lot better when I'm in the battlefield than it does when I'm in the safety of my hospital. I didn't serve, so I don't know, but I've heard that that's what happens. What was that? Super glue, oh God. I guess that's better than hot glue. Cool, does that make sense? And I'll walk around again, and anyone on YouTube, if there's anyone over there on YouTube, I'm happy to chat through this too. Logan, do you have a startup you're working on? How do I keep the speaker on track? That's a job to be done. I'm going to answer this question on the mic because it's a super good question, which is my product is dependent on these other products to help users get a job done, right? And like me using Bitcoin, I'm dependent on Cold Card or I'm dependent on Coinbase. Like that's a huge one, right? Is that the acquire step of Bitcoin, you have to go through KYC if you go through that means. So what happens when you are connected to these others? The unfortunate answer is that you have to always reorient yourself towards the customer. The customer is trying to get a job done, and it's not their problem that these other solutions they're using suck, right? It's your problem. So what that means is you just have to build it in to your assumption. So when you look at that broader job, let's say there's a broader job of moving money and transferring money, and Plaid is a big piece of that. And maybe they use Excel, they use Plaid, they maybe use your app, maybe they use Bitcoin, maybe they're using fiat in there somewhere. Like there's several different solutions that are all being strung together. That's typical for any job. Multiple solutions are coming together. And then of course they're duct taping, they're figuring stuff out on their own because solutions don't exist. People will switch to a superior solution that gets the overarching job done. But that better solution may only be for a piece of the job. So Plaid may suck, and you need to now make something good enough that when we're used in conjunction with Plaid, it is superior than not being used in conjunction with Plaid. And so the bar is actually raised when you don't have control over one aspect of the job. But the good news is that if you can achieve that bar, then generally you will get the resources you need to then go after other parts of the job. So from a long-term strategy standpoint, let me go to this. From a long-term strategy standpoint, or this one's a better one. Maybe your V1 is over here, no one's paying you, you maybe pay users to test it, give you feedback, or you're bugging friends and your grandmother or whoever it is. Here maybe people are using it, but you get a lot of complaints. Maybe the complaints are Plaid related, they're not even your fault, right? But maybe you're able to get enough revenue. And so now for the next initiative, now you go after Plaid and you disrupt them and you bump them out of their position. So that's an example of how it could come together. Every company is dealing with this, right? And every company is forced to innovate. But if you can get a deep understanding of your customer, then what that gives you is not just a leg up with your own efforts, but also with the efforts of your integrator, your partners. So you could go to Plaid and say, hey, Plaid, you probably don't have a great understanding of your customer. Here's what I found out. Our users are struggling along these dimensions. If you fix this, my life will be better, people like Plaid better, and so you can actually be a really good partner in that sense. Also a good competitor too, depending on which angle you take. Does that help answer the question? Okay.
The last part.
Yeah. Any other questions on this half of the canvas? Okay. Let's see. So this all wraps it up. So basically what we want to do is you've brainstormed all the different functions you had in mind. You thought about other products that are used in conjunction with yours. You've abstracted those into one or more categorical descriptions. You want to do the same thing you did going from box 3 to box 4 and either pick one of those categorical descriptors or create a new one that casts an envelope over or umbrella over those abstracted job statements. So either pick one or create a new one that goes over all of them. Now, what I would guess is that in a lot of these situations, you may have different domains in box 7 because maybe you have 3 functions in mind and they don't really neatly align under a single job statement, in which case what I would argue is that you are doing, back to my earlier slide, you are doing a market selection activity. Totally fine. I would write all 3 separately. I know that Canvas is designed to get you to 1, but it's all startups are doing a market selection to some degree. Some have assumed it, and you're going deep within one. Like Oliver, yours is probably 1 market, I would guess. But Ben, it sounded like yours might be 2 or 3, right? In which case you're doing kind of a side-by-side comparison. So for the purpose of the Canvas, if you can roll it up to a single job, go ahead and do that. And if there's maybe 2 or 3, you can jot them down. There's another tool. If you do have 2 or 3, or 10, as might be the case, there's this tool here, which is back on my GitHub. It's the market selection spreadsheet. And I will not go over this as part of this workshop, but I'm going to hang out afterwards so I can talk you through this because there's a lot of information here. But it's basically just doing a very rigorous side-by-side comparison of different markets you might be interested in. But for the purpose of today, I'm going to kind of finish up this talk and get us to a value proposition and put a bow tie on the event. Okay, so what does this look like when we do this in big companies, right? Or even startups too, but usually we're doing Series B or C and up just because we're a consultancy, it costs money to hire consultants, and usually that's a budget item that it's not worthwhile until the company's larger. Now, I still think it's worthwhile to do this exercise as a founder because you're incurring the personal cost of spending all this time on something that like doesn't see the light of day. So it's very important to do it. You just don't have the money to spend on paying someone else to do it. So I will present how this can be done at the highest level, and then you may get creative with how to downsize this into something that you can kind of do on a day-to-day practical basis. So we will generate typically around 75 to 150 need statements, typically, over a course of 8 to 10 paid customer interviews. So we recruit customers that are an ideal customer persona, and depending on who it is, if it's a consumer, maybe it's $50 an interview, and if it's a surgeon, maybe it's $2,000 an interview. And if it's a CEO, it's gonna be really hard to get them on the phone. You can do it, but you might have to be more creative high-level investment managers are some of the hardest people to get on the phone because their time is so valuable. With a lawyer, you have to pay their hourly rate, right? So if you have friends, you leverage your friends, you leverage ChatGPT, you read books. It's another good way to build this out is become an expert in that subject. And you may already have a lot of intuition by working in your startup. You can use this framework to capture your own knowledge because since you've already been kind of absorbing information, it's held in whatever way it's held in your brain. Think of this as like a framework to deposit your knowledge into, right? And you could probably get to 50, 75% just out of your own brain. It's not gonna be perfect, but like we're doing this scrappy because we're startups, we don't have any money, right? So that's how we do it from the get-go. Typically what we do is we take that survey, we'd run it with a statistically valid survey across a population size, between 100 and over 1,000 people. And we'd quantify each one of those needs across the 2 metrics that Carl Menger said, importance and satisfaction. We'd also overlay other questions that might be hypotheses we have that describe why we think one segment might be more underserved versus another segment. So for example, you might say that Bitcoin learners are struggling when they are not technically savvy. So you might add in an extra question in the survey and just say, how many years of technical experience you have. Or any questions you might think of if you were to create a survey from scratch, you just dump those in too. These surveys, if you have 100 statements in the survey, it's gonna become a long survey. So there's all sorts of ways to downsize this survey to get the cost lower because again, we're recruiting people and we're paying them to take the survey. So it can be quite expensive to do it. One of the ways to downsize it is to only go deep in the steps that your product currently does today. So if Plaid or other products are in other steps, you're like, it'd be great to know this, but I can't realistically create a solution in that part of the job for the next 2 years. You can come back to it when you have money to go do that. So you might just go deep in one step. That dramatically cuts down the number of questions in the survey, the time for someone to complete the survey, and thus the cost to run it. Or you might say, I don't have the time for any of that. I'm just going to do the steps, right? And just see at the step level, is there any step that's very important and not well satisfied? So the point is we run a survey, we get data out, and what you're looking at is a representation of what that data looks like. On the x-axis, you have the importance. Specifically, I'll be careful with my words. We're getting to statistics here, but this is the percentage of the population that rated a given statement very or extremely important. So let's say we surveyed 100 people and we had 150 outcome statements or need statements. There would be 150 dots on this page, each one representing an average of those 100 people. And if, 50, how many people? I lost already. Was it 150 statements, 100 people, so 50 of those people said that it was very or extremely important, you'd be right on the midline of the x-axis. The y-axis is the same thing for satisfaction, so very or extremely satisfied. And if someone is far in this corner, what they are saying is that these need statements are very important to them, but they are not well satisfied. Or in other words, they are underserved needs. And if it's on the other side, it is not important, but they are comparatively more satisfied with those needs. So those are overserved needs. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have Krista from Access Tribe. Can you go back to where you had the diagram?
This one? Here? Which diagram?
Yeah, that.
Okay.
So she's doing something called Access Tribe. It's a community to empower women in Bitcoin. Community management she has as one. Number two, she has community manager, right? And then she's not sure what to put in three as far as abstracted job executor.
Yeah.
You probably haven't seen Access Tribe, so my bad, but
if you are helping women in Bitcoin, the purpose of a company or a product should be to provide someone with the means to achieve an end. So the end, if it's helping women get involved with Bitcoin, for example, then the person would be a woman, right? Any female person, right? That would be your end job executor in that case. Excuse me. It might be a two-sided market in that case too, where you do have the community manager on the other hand. For the purpose of this exercise, I would actually advocate you start with the women because the community manager is a solution that is being used. It's like you could think of the person as kind of like part of the product, right? They're part of the solution that helps women get involved in Bitcoin. Now, you could argue that maybe it's the other way around, which is maybe it's not so much that women are actively trying to get involved in Bitcoin, but it's more people want to get more women involved in Bitcoin, in which case maybe it is more on the community manager or it's almost like a persuader type role, right? Someone who is going out actively recruiting women. I was just down in Costa Rica for the event down there, and there's some really great people who were doing this. So extremely important to be done. I think you could do it from either angle without knowing more about your company, but feel free to ping me. I think my email is, Car, are you able to drop my email?
Yeah, I can drop it.
Yeah. Feel free to ping me. This goes for all of you guys too, and I'm just happy to talk. I love this stuff way more than I should. I do think that being an entrepreneur is super hard, and so I'm happy to work through this with you. So you could probably do it both, right? You could probably do, on the one side, it's women who maybe are trying to get into Bitcoin, and the other hand, it might be community managers who are trying to help women get into Bitcoin. Those aren't the greatest job statements. I think they need some work. Yeah, but that's a starting point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing that Club Lab is, right? It's like, how do you, yeah, it's the community thing that's always the toughest part.
Yeah, you got two. I mean, in your case, I would say it's probably more on, you could probably focus more on the end user of the Bitcoin entrepreneur, right? Who's trying to have a successful Bitcoin company. And then you as a community manager, if you call yourself that that you're serving that you're part of that solution. It's hard. That's a hard. And you do have to be careful too. Like sometimes with the community manager, especially with the persuasion stuff, and like it's one thing to create an education solution when people are trying to learn. It's another thing to try to educate people on the problem. And we all know this because we're all Bitcoiners. It is so freaking hard to tell people that they have a problem, right? And it's just it's a saying in startup land, which is you don't do that. If you have to teach them that they have a problem, you got to look somewhere else. Like it's possible to do. It's just, it's not really, it's very difficult, right? So, that's where for women who are getting into Bitcoin, like you could argue that some of that does sound a little bit like persuasion, but you don't want to persuade women. You want to make it easier for women who want to get involved but can't today, because you can't dictate the ends that people have. People have an end that they're trying to achieve. People just have goals, right? It's their choice to have their goals. They may want all of their money to get diluted away and become wage slaves, and I am currently a wage slave, by the way, but become kind of locked into the fiat system. And obviously they don't think that way, but it's up to them to have the goal. If they don't want to have state-separated money, then it's pretty hard to persuade them. Like you can educate them, but it's difficult. It adds a huge burden on the startup that is very difficult. It just makes it harder to monetize that company. So the point I was making with the analysis is essentially you want to apply some rigor and be able to identify quantitatively, ideally, which of those needs you should focus on, okay? And the statement I made earlier is really quite profound, which is when products satisfy the set of unmet needs 15% better than competing solutions, that population of people adopt the solution. And that's from our studies. There's not really a theoretical basis for that number. That's just empirically what we've seen. So imagine this bubble here. If this was pushed over to the left, meaning that all of a sudden these people weren't ranking those needs as very or extremely unsatisfied. Instead, they were saying, oh, I'm pretty well satisfied. Well, that's because they've adopted that new solution. If you just get 1, 2, 3 of those needs, you may not notice any usage of your product, but suddenly you'll see a shift once you start to hit that 10, 15% number. Pretty profound. That's what makes this whole thing a solvable problem, because we've connected the dollars back to the features you're building. So the way to think about it is something like this in your backlog, right? You maybe have 7 need statements you're working through, and you've got solution you're currently working on, hypothetical future solution, hypothetical future ranking that you could achieve with those solutions. And you can test all this in idea space before you build anything, which is why theoretically this outpaces any iteration method, because you're iterating at the speed of thought and information. You're not iterating at the speed of code or hardware. Now, code is interesting because there are cases where if you can iterate very quickly in a software environment, you probably could outpace this. Like if you can just brute force, if you can do like weekly iterations, that type of cadence, and get quick feedback, there's maybe an argument to be made that you could brute force your way to a product market fit without any understanding of the customer, right? You're just doing it through raw iteration and speed. You definitely can't do that in hardware, and you definitely can't do that in regulatory environments, because in those cases, you've got huge overhead that you have to get through. So the longer your development cycle, the more important it is to think this way. The shorter your development cycle, the more you can get away with not doing it. I would still argue, no matter how fast you're iterating, maybe like an influencer, maybe the influencer is the only person who could get away not doing this because they have the smallest time to develop new content. Quantify all this, right? You can see on the left, these are what the statements look like. When we create these statements, we create only two types of need statements. Good things that people are trying to achieve faster, and bad things that people are trying to avoid doing. And we use very specific language for a reason, which is minimize the time it takes to, verb, object, minimize the likelihood of or that, verb, object. And we've just found empirically, again, that this verbiage minimizes bias in surveys. One of the unfortunate nuances about customer research is that if a customer tells you the same piece of information in two different ways, and then you go quantify that in with a survey, you'll get two different responses back because words have connotations. And so that's very problematic. So when you're thinking about these statements, it's important to remove bias so you're getting as raw information as you possibly can get, right? You want to just get like distilled down pure information for your startup. So it's not the full vocabulary of everything a customer could say, because they'll tell you stories, they'll say what solution that you should build, they'll tell you like something very emotional, and you just want to get back to you're trying to achieve a job, you've got steps, and you've got metrics within those steps that are good things or bad things. Another way to think about it is, I like the rock in the shoe example. I'll use it in a different way, which is you can think of people, the needs that people have are basically barriers to getting the job done. They're imperfections in their ability to get the job done. And so need statements are metrics that need to be removed, because when we remove all the imperfections from a process, then that process is done perfectly. And at the end of the day, maybe 10,000 years in the future, I'll have a job to be done and I'll think it and it'll just happen immediately. No barrier at all, zero, right? That's the end goal that we're trying to get to. Obviously, it's a long way to go, but that's what this innovation effort is driving towards. So this is the last activity I have for you guys. I've got some examples afterwards that I can talk through, and I'm happy to hang out if this is helpful for anyone to dive into your startup deeper. But let's look back at your canvas, and you can write down. I've only got a couple of these sheets, by the way, in that, so I might not have enough for everyone. But you can.
She'll reach out to you.
Okay. This is how you can describe your value proposition to an investor, just someone who's interested. People say, tell me about your company. You say, okay, well, I'm helping learners who are trying to, how did you define your job? Can I use you as an example?
So remove my reservations fear around Bitcoin ownership and receive accessible Bitcoin education, so I'm encouraged to make my first purchase.
Right, that's a big statement.
Yeah.
I'm going to just use a simple example for now. So let's say learners who are trying to gain Bitcoin competency, something like that. And then what you've hit on in that statement are potentially needs that are reasons why that job is hard for people to do. I'm trying to help learners gain Bitcoin competency by minimizing the time it takes to determine whether information is honest or non-misleading, or minimize the likelihood of not being able to implement the knowledge I'm learning. And so you might have a set of these statements. I think a lot of times when people talk about value propositions, they say it's like this one magical statement you put on your website and boom, all of a sudden your company's going to take off once you nail the statement. I don't think that's accurate. I think the way to think about it is that's a banner or a headline, but the value proposition is like the core of your company. Why is your company good? And the reason it's good is because it's helping people along not just one metric, but multiple metrics, right? And so you can use this to brainstorm. You might only pitch this to like a few people, but it's good to have in your back pocket because it'll show investors, for example, if you're fundraising, that you've done your due diligence. It's like the first thing they're going to ask is, have you talked to customers? How do you know that people want this? And you say, well, originally I thought that they wanted X, Y, Z, but I dug in deeper and I found out that they're actually satisfied along those dimensions. It's these other 5 dimensions, but it's only all 5 of them when combined. My product combines all 5. These other things only do 2 or 3. Like, that's why my solution's better. So getting that level of granularity is really is what's going to differentiate. That's all I got for this workshop. So